You're watching the MMA Oracles Podcast, and now, presenting your host, Jack Moon.
And we're back with episode 4 of the MMA Oracles Podcast. I am your host, Jack Moon. In this episode, I'm going to be covering UFC Fight Night 236, headlined by a middleweight bout between Jack the Joker Hermansson and Joe Bodybagz Pyfer. We did pretty good last week, but I am just going to go ahead and dive straight into this card because last week's card was shit. This card's not that much better, but we are going to start with the first fight of the night between Daniel Sankora Marcos and the Mongolian murderer Arichi Kilang. This is the fourth scheduled opponent for Marcos in the past 4 months, as he was scheduled to fight Daniel Santos, who pulled out of that fight. Victor Hugo then stepped in to replace him, but he missed weight and that fight was canceled. Then Marcos was set to face another opponent, but Marcos had visa issues and he was forced to pull out. So now he finally gets to fight Arichi Kilang here. Marcos is 30 years old. He is undefeated at 15-0 with 8 knockouts and 7 decisions. He's a pretty efficient fighter. He sets a high pace, but he does so smartly. He's got good defense, and he's just constantly attacking, and he can really just outwork his opponents. On the other side, Arichi Kilang is also 30 years old, but he is 25-11 with 8 knockouts, 1 submission, and 16 decisions. And he's sort of similar but opposite of Marcos as well. He also sets a high pace, but he is a wild brawler with no defense. He will just go all out to try and get the finish or to land his shots and doesn't really care what's coming back at him. That has made Marcos the minus 210 moderate favorite here, and Arichi Kilang the plus 165 slight underdog. There's currently 1,213 Tapology votes on this fight. 91% of them are picking Marcos, with 73% of those expecting him to win a decision. Of the 9% taking Arichi Kilang, 62% are taking him to win by decision. The fans don't seem to be expecting a finish here, and neither am I. And really, this was an easy pick for Marcos. He's undefeated, and unless he really just throws caution to the wind and gets into a brawl with Arichi Kilang, he really should have this in the bag. He can set a similar output to what Arichi Kilang can, and he will keep up with that pace, but Arichi Kilang cannot even come close to the defensive capabilities that Marcos has. He's much more wild, and he's going to take more shots because of that. Marcos is also the better wrestler in this fight. So really, no matter where it goes, he should stay in control and come out with the decision victory. So the official pick for the first fight of the night is Daniel Marcos by unanimous decision. Moving on to the second fight of the night, this is a featherweight pairing between Hyder the Hurricane Emil versus Fernie Garcia. This is the third scheduled opponent for Emil on this card, as he was originally supposed to face Shaylan Nurdanbieki, and then he was set to face Melsik Bagdasaryan, and now he is taking on Fernie Garcia, who's coming in on about a week's notice. Garcia is moving up from bantamweight to take this opportunity as well. He likely needed something like this, as he's currently 0-3 in the UFC, so big fight for both fighters here. Emil is currently 33 years old. He is undefeated at 8-0. He has 4 knockout wins, 1 submission, and 3 decisions. He actually looked really good on the Contender Series. I was impressed with him. He trains with the El Nino Training Center, and he looked remarkably like his coach, Gilbert Melendez, with his striking and footwork. He had one combination and footwork move where it was like I was watching Gilbert Melendez back in the day. And he is making his UFC debut here, so I'm excited to see what he will do in the UFC. On the other side, Garcia is 31 years old. He is 10-4 overall, with 1 TKO victory, 3 submissions, and 6 decisions. Garcia, like I mentioned, is currently 0-3 in the UFC. He lost to Journey Newson, Brady Heastan, and Rinya Nakamura, all by decision. Emil is the current favorite at minus 185, with Garcia sitting at a plus 154 slight underdog. There's currently 920 Tapology picks on this fight. 88% of those are favoring Emil. 83% of those are picking him to win a decision. Of the 12% taking Garcia, 68% of those are taking him to win a decision. Doesn't seem like they are expecting a finish, and I am not either, but it wouldn't surprise me necessarily in this fight. This was another easy pick for me here. I'm going with Hyder Emil, the favorite. Like I mentioned, he really impressed me on the Contender Series. I liked his footwork. I liked his combinations. I liked his takedown defense. I liked his heart. The guy he was fighting really just kept trying to lay on him and was diving at his ankles. And he kept getting out, making him get back to his feet, and just outworked him on the feet. So I really liked that from him. Going into the UFC, he probably will have to face some more wrestlers. So that was encouraging to see from him. On the other side, Garcia has just been a complete bust. He lost to a bum in his UFC debut in Journey Newson, who's no longer on the roster. And then he lost to some decent prospects in Brady Houston and Rinya Nakamura, but those guys are still pretty inexperienced guys looking to make a name for themselves. And they really just kind of cruise to decisions over him. There's not much resistance from Garcia's side. So it doesn't bode well for him moving up a division and taking on a guy like Emil, who is going to be hungry making his debut. And he looked really good, like I mentioned. So Emil also has that great team behind him at the El Nino Training Center. He also went 3-0 in Bellator and then 3-0 in LFA before coming to the Contender Series and winning a fight. So he's experienced big shows before. So I don't think he's going to have any UFC jitters making his debut here. He is the bigger fighter, being the natural featherweight. So he has a reach advantage, and a finish wouldn't shock me. He's got more power. He's got the reach advantage. I think he's going to be able to land a lot of shots. Garcia's never been put away, though, so I will say he makes it to the final bell, but I think we're just going to see much of the same of Garcia's first 3 fights in the UFC, just his opponent in control the whole time and him not offering up much resistance. The official pick will be Hyder Emil by unanimous decision. Up next, we have a light heavyweight pairing between Zach the High Chief Pauga and Bogdan Zarevich Guskov. This is an important fight for these two low-end light heavyweights. They're both really in need of a win at this point. So let's just get right into it. Pauga is 35 years old. He is 6-2 overall with 1 TKO victory and 5 decisions. He was on The Ultimate Fighter Season 30, and he beat Niall Bartling and Jordan Heiderman to advance all the way to the finals. It looked like he was going to win. He actually really impressed me during his time on The Ultimate Fighter. He was a clear standout. He was able to show improvements in his game from fight to fight, and I liked what I saw of him on there, and I was actually favoring him to win in the finals, but he ended up getting knocked out by Muhammad Usman. He is a good athlete. He's been a pro athlete in multiple other sports. He's got a great team behind him at Elevation Fight Team. But like I mentioned, he is 35 years old, so there is some limited potential there. But we have seen him improve, so we'll have to see how he looks in this fight here against Guskov, who is 31 years old. He is 14-3 overall with 12 knockouts and 2 submission victories. As you can tell, he has finished all of his pro wins, and he is an all-or-nothing type fighter. He has lost, and he's coming off a loss in his UFC debut to a former title challenger in Volkan Ozdemir. So this is a nice step down for him to kind of gauge his skill set and see where he really stands in this division. Pauga is coming into this fight as a minus 135 slight favorite, with Guskov sitting at a plus 115 near even underdog. There is currently 1,171 Tapology picks on this fight. 79% of those are actually favoring Guskov, with 85% picking him to win by knockout. Of the 21% taking Pauga, 55% of him expect to win a decision. The fans are disagreeing with the odds makers here, as the odds makers have Pauga as the favorite, and I'm actually disagreeing with them as well. I am going with Guskov. Pauga just really hasn't shown the stopping ability needed to deal with a fighter like Guskov, and I don't think he's got anything to really stop the attack of Guskov. Guskov is going to be able to just kind of come forward and start letting his strikes fly because the knockout power is not there for Pauga, and the wrestling's not there for him either. I think that would probably be his best bet to win here. I think we kind of saw how Guskov's ground game is pretty limited. He got submitted by Volkan Ozdemir, who's not a guy that's known for a ground game at all. But Pauga, he rarely shoots for takedowns. And when he does, he doesn't get them. He's only succeeded on 9% of his takedowns in the UFC, and he's had 3 fights in the UFC so far. So really just not a great wrestler, and doesn't have a ton of power in his hands either. So I think Guskov's going to be able to trade some strikes with him, and I think that's going to be bad news for Pauga. I think, we saw him get knocked out by Muhammad Usman. That was at heavyweight, but I mean, Usman's strikes are really just kind of winging bombs, and he's not a very technical striker. So if he was able to catch him, I think at 205, a guy that's a little bit quicker like Guskov should be able to catch him as well. So my official pick will be Bogdan Guskov by first round knockout. Moving on to the fourth fight of the night. This is a welterweight matchup between Max Payne Griffin and Jeremiah Wells. Both of these guys are somewhat journeymen at this point, so I don't really care for the matchup. Neither one of them really has much to gain here. Wells is already ranked ahead of Griffin in my rankings, but he's coming off a loss, and it's looking like he could be on a decline, especially at his age. A win just really halts that, while a loss sends him tumbling down the division. For Griffin, it's pretty much the same thing. He's faced better fighters before this, and a win over Wells really doesn't mean much for him or his resume, and a loss puts retirement on the table and sends him down the division as well. On the red corner, we have Griffin, who is 38 years old. He is 19-10 overall, with 9 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 8 decisions. He's a well-rounded fighter. He's got good striking. He's got a decent team behind him at MMA Gold Fight Team. He's got good fight IQ and a kind of a veteran savvy at this point in the ring. In the blue corner, we do have Wells, who is 37 years old. He is 12-3 overall, with 5 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 3 decisions. He is an explosive athlete, a finisher. He's got a good team behind him as well at Renzo Gracie Philly. Wells is coming into this fight as the minus 180 slight favorite, while Griffin is a plus 150 slight underdog. This was the hardest fight for me to predict on the card, as I see it being super close. There is currently 1,197 Tapology picks on the card for this fight. 79% of those are actually picking Jeremiah Wells, with 72% of those picking him to win by decision. Of the 21% going with Griffin, 73% expect him to win a decision. I am also expecting this fight to go to the judges' scorecards. I think Wells is the better finisher between the two, but I don't see him being able to get Griffin out of there. Griffin's only ever been finished once in his career, and it was a third-round TKO against Colby Covington. Wells doesn't really set that kind of pace that Colby sets, and while a knockout wouldn't shock me, as he does have that explosive power, Griffin is pretty good defensively. He's definitely the better striker, and so I don't see Wells having much success in the wrestling or grappling either. Griffin's never been submitted, and he's got good takedown defense. So with this fight most likely going to a decision, I'm actually favoring the underdog. Griffin, like I mentioned, has good fight IQ, and we've seen Wells kind of make some mistakes in that area. In his last fight, he was submitted, and he had that one fight where he started running around the cage and tripped and fell and almost paid for it. So I don't really trust his fight IQ. I like the veteran experience of Max Griffin. He is the better striker, so he should win the exchanges on the feet, and his takedown defense is solid, and his grappling defense is good as well. So my official pick will be Max Griffin by unanimous decision. Moving on to the fifth fight of the night, and this really isn't a great fight here. We're moving to the light heavyweight division, and this is a matchup between Devin Brown Bear Clark and Marcin Prachnio. It's a pretty shit fight between two gatekeepers again on this card. Two guys that really don't have much to gain from this matchup. I really like to see both of these guys as sort of a test for fighters looking to move up. I know there's not many in this really shallow division, so I think that's why we got them here together, but it's not a matchup I'm very favorable of. On the red corner, Clark is 33 years old. He is 14-8 overall, with 4 knockouts, 1 submission, and 9 decision victories. He's got a good team behind him at Elevation Fight Team, and he's got some decent wins over currently top-ranked Alonzo Menafield, Da Un Jung as well, and he's currently 8-8 in the UFC. In the blue corner, we have Prachnio, who is 35 years old. He is 16-7 overall with 11 knockouts, 1 submission, and 4 decision wins. He had a lot of hype around him before he came to the UFC. He made a name for himself, mostly outside the UFC, but he's pretty much been a bust in the UFC. He's currently 3-5 in the octagon. His best win is over Khalil Roundtree, who's currently top ranked and looking good, but really he's struggled so far in the octagon. Devin Clark is currently sitting as a minus 190 slight favorite, with Prachnio sitting at a plus 160 slight underdog. There's currently 1,155 Tapology votes on this fight. 77% of the picks are going towards Clark, with 80% of those thinking he's going to win a decision. Of the 23% that have Prachnio, 62% are taking him by decision as well. And that's kind of where I'm leaning as well. I don't see a finish in this fight. I think it's going to be pretty boring. Prachnio, he's just too flat-footed and slow. I don't think he has the footwork or the takedown defense to really keep Devin Clark off him and set up the strikes that he'll need to win this fight. And I think if Clark is smart, he doesn't really give him any space or play in that striking range at all. He just pressures heavily from the start, sticks to Prachnio like glue, controls him against the fence, and tries to work his takedowns in. I think we're going to see a lot of that clinch work, takedown work against the fence, and it's going to be a really boring fight for the full 15 minutes, but that does favor Devin Clark, so he will be my pick. Give me, for the official pick, Devin Clark by unanimous decision. We're moving on to the sixth fight on this card, and if you thought that last fight was boring, well, buckle up because we have a women's strawweight fight on tap. This is a fight between Loma Lubunmi and Bruna, the Special One, Brazil. This is probably a pretty boring fight as well. Loma is constantly fighting down in the division, which I don't necessarily understand. She's got a decent record. She is 28 years old, 8-3 overall. She has 1 TKO victory, 1 submission, and 6 decisions. She is a bit undersized for this division, but she's fast and she's a high-level striker. She has a background in boxing and Muay Thai. She was a multiple-time champion in amateur and pro Muay Thai, and she went 6-1 as a boxer as well. Made her way up in Invicta for a few fights before coming to the UFC. On the other side, Brazil is 30 years old. She's 9-3-1 overall with 3 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 4 decisions. Her nickname is the Special One, and she really looks like it when she's fighting bums. When she's fighting low-end competition, she's is able to crush them pretty much. But she has been stopped in all 3 of her losses by knockout. Most of those have been against the only good competition she's ever faced. One of them was due to an injury, but she got, I believe it was TKO'd by Ariane Carnelosi in her first pro fight. She had that, it was a knee injury. It was in her 4th pro fight, so that was considered a TKO loss. And then she got TKO'd by Denise Gomes in her UFC debut. Looks like Loma is the favorite in this. She is minus 245 moderate favorite. Brazil is a plus 200 moderate underdog. There's 1,194 Tapology picks on this fight, with 86% of those favoring Loma to win. 88% of those are favoring her to win a decision. Of the 14% taking Brazil, looks like 73% are taking her to win a decision. So the fans are expecting this one to go to the judges, and so am I. Loma's really not a finisher. Like I said, she's too small for this division, so she doesn't have the power necessary to put fighters away. And I just don't think Brazil is good enough to counter her or land the shots that she would need to get a finish in this fight either. She is bigger and she can hit hard. She had that nice head kick on the Contender Series, but that was against a lower end fighter in Marnik Man. But yeah, her height and reach do worry me slightly. But we just really haven't seen her be able to beat this level of competition yet. Loma's 5-2 in the UFC. She also crushes low end fighters. She's beaten Alexandra Albu, Jinyu Fry, Sam Hughes, and Denise Gomes, which is probably her best win, and then Elise Reed as well in the UFC. And then her losses in the UFC are to Angela Hill and Lupita Godinez, two top-ranked fighters. So she kind of right now is almost settling into a gatekeeper role near the top 15. She's crushing everyone else that's trying to move up, but she has been unable to break into that top 15 herself. Brazil, her best wins, that head kick on the Contender Series over Marnik Man that I mentioned. She also just took a decision victory over Shauna Bannon, the previously undefeated Shauna Bannon, in her last outing. So that was a good win for her, but she did get knocked out in her UFC debut to Denise Gomes. They do have that common opponent in Gomes, and it looks like, MMA math doesn't always add up, but Brazil got knocked out by her, and Loma was able to beat her by decision. I think we're going to see just another kind of classic Loma performance here where she's quick, she lands a lot of strikes, she's the more technical striker, and she just wins the rounds. So, official pick will be Loma to take a unanimous decision. Next up, the seventh fight of the night heads to the lightweight division for a matchup between the debuting Balaji, the Zulu warrior Oki, and Damir, the Bosnian bomber Hadzovic. This really looks like a setup showcase fight for Oki, but Hadzovic is dangerous, so we'll have to see how it goes. Hadzovic is in the red corner at 37 years old. He is 14-7 overall, with 7 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 4 decision victories. He hasn't fought in over a year and a half, but when he does fight, he's a pretty durable brawler with decent wins over John McGuire, Marcin Held, Nick Hine, Polo Reyes, and Yancy Medeiros. In the blue corner, Oki is 28 years old. He is 8-1 overall with 5 knockouts, 1 submission, and 2 decisions. And he's coming off an impressive performance on the Contender Series where he ended up knocking out a fighter who was a higher level striker who had a background in striking. And Oki kind of put it on him and looked really good. And he's making his UFC debut here, looking to make another statement and start out his UFC career on the right foot. Oki is a minus 270 moderate favorite, while Hadzovic is a plus 220 moderate underdog. There is currently 1,178 Tapology votes on this fight, with 93% of them favoring Oki. 77% are picking him to win by knockout. Of the 7% that have Hadzovic, 55% are taking him by decision. Hadzovic has been durable in the past. He's only been stopped by strikes, I believe, 1 time. So that does worry me a bit that the longer this fight goes, he could start to take over, especially if Oki is suffering from any UFC jitters, or if he starts, hitting Hadzovic with his best shot and he's still there. It can kind of break him mentally and allow Hadzovic back into this fight. Hadzovic has only been stopped 1 time by strikes. and that was by Mairbek Taisumov in his UFC debut back in 2016. So that is something to kind of keep an eye out for in this fight. I think Oki is a little bit unproven, so I am surprised to see him as such a large favorite going into this matchup. Uh, he is the bigger fighter with the reach advantage. He is stronger, faster. He's just a better athlete all around than Hadzovic. Hadzovic's 37 years old, so I'm sure that durability is starting to wane a little bit. He also may be suffering from ring rust as he hasn't fought in a long time. So there's a lot of unknown variables kind of going into this fight. So surprised to see the odds at what they are and the picks at what they are, but I'm also going to stick with the favorite here. I think Ogi's just going to be too fast. He's got explosive power. He showed good technique on the Contender Series as well. So, and I think Hadzovic is just going to be too slow, too flat-footed, and too defensively. He's not very good defensively either. He takes a lot of hits. So, take a lot of hits from a guy like Oki early. It's not a recipe. It's not really a winning recipe there unless his durability is still insanely good and he can kind of just almost Homer Simpson him and tire him out from taking a beating and then come back in the later rounds. But I don't see that happening. So my official pick will be Balaji Oki to win by knockout in the first round. Headlining the preliminary card, we do have a matchup in the welterweight division between Trevin the Problem Giles and Carlos the Nightmare Prates. This is a big test for Prates in his debut, but he looked great on the Contender Series, so this should be an interesting fight. Giles is 31 years old. He is 16-5 overall with 6 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 5 decisions. As you can tell by that, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. He's got big power in his strikes, pretty solid wrestling, and dangerous submissions as well that you don't really expect. He's not going to hit you with like anything crazy, but he can lock up a submission when he needs to. So I really see him being an underrated fighter. I liked him a little bit better at middleweight, but this guy's got wins over currently top-ranked Brendan Allen in the middleweight division, who's pushing towards the title. Current top-ranked light heavyweight Ryan Spann. He beat James Krause. He beat current top-ranked middleweight Roman Dolidze, and he just beat Preston Parsons, I believe, was his last win as well. So on the other side, Prates is 30 years old. He is 17-6 overall, 12 knockout wins, 3 submissions, 2 decisions. He's coming off that impressive win on the Contender Series to earn his UFC contract, and he got compared by Dana White to Anderson Silva due to his movement and striking, and I saw a little bit of that as well. He looked really fluid, and his striking was super impressive. He was fighting Mitch Ramirez, who was only 7-0. That's a guy that was trying to get onto the Ultimate Fighter. Ended up getting the shot on the Contender Series instead. A little bit of controversy there with him getting kicked out of TUF due to Conor McGregor, but Ramirez is good, but he's not a super high level guy. So this, I think, is a pretty big step up for Prates. Even saying that, Prates is currently sitting at a minus 225 moderate favorite, with Giles sitting as a plus 185 slight underdog. There's currently 1,182 Tapology votes on the fight, with 84% favoring Prates, 80% are picking him to win by knockout. Of the 16% taking Giles, 67% are expecting him to win a decision. And I do kind of somewhat agree with those picks. I think the longer the fight goes, it could favor Giles more. It wouldn't even shock me if he pulled off a finish later in the fight. He definitely has the experience edge. As I mentioned, he's beaten multiple guys that are currently top ranked in higher divisions. So, like I said, I think Giles is a guy that's really underestimated. He's really underestimated in a lot of his fights as well. So there is value in him as an underdog in this fight. If you want to go down that road, I wouldn't blame you. Especially since I did see some issues on the Contender Series with Prates' fight IQ and overconfidence. He was kind of having his way with Ramirez a bit in the first round, striking at least. He did get taken down, and he was kind of trash talking off of his back. He ended up hitting a sweep and getting back to his feet. So that was good to see as well. But the thing I didn't like was in between rounds, he wasn't really listening to his coaches. He was still kind of talking trash, still super high energy, and just really not paying attention to his coaches at all. He was ready to get back in there, and he did get the job done. Kind of dominated that second round and got the finish against Mitch Ramirez, but eventually he will get humbled if he starts doing that and kind of overlooking his opponents that way. Something that will come back to bite him in the ass. So watch out for that for sure. If he gets overconfident here with Giles is a guy that will definitely make him pay. But that being said, I do think Giles is a bit of a slow starter. He kind of tends to get caught early. He has been finished multiple times, so Prates is a guy that, he is going to come out high energy. He's going to come out quick. And I think that could be a problem for Giles. Giles has been finished. Total of all 5 of his losses are finished losses. 2 knockouts, 3 submissions. Most of them early as well. Couple in the third round, but most in the first or second. So if he can get later into the fight, I think that will favor him more. But the speed and dynamic striking of Prates is going to be a big problem for him early. So I am going to go with Prates to catch him and put him away. I think Giles being that slow starter and the way Prates is he's going to shoot out of a cannon, I think, in this fight. And I think he's really just going to come after him early and just start throwing everything he can at him. And I don't think Giles is going to make it out of the first round. So my official pick will be Carlos Prates by knockout in the first round. Kicking off the main card, we head to the middleweight division for a bout between Rodolfo, the black belt hunter Vieira, and Armen Petrosyan. This is a pretty simple striker versus grappler pairing. These two were actually originally scheduled to face each other back in November, but Petrosyan had an illness that caused the fight to be canceled, and then it was rescheduled to this card here. In the red corner, we have Vieira, who's 34 years old. He is 9-2 overall with 1 TKO win and 8 submissions. As you can tell, he is a finisher. He has finished all of his pro wins. He is a super high-level grappler. He's a submission specialist. He'll do just about anything to get to the fight to the floor, including pull guard if he has to. He does have some cardio issues, but he's definitely shown some improvement in that area. I think he's learned some lessons from his recent losses. On the other side, we have Petrosyan, who is 33 years old. He is 9-2 overall with 6 knockouts and 3 decisions. He's a pretty good striker. And the longer this fight goes, it's more likely to favor him because of those cardio issues that I mentioned for Vieira. Vieira is currently sitting at a minus 115 near even favorite, while Petrosyan is sitting at minus 105. There is currently 1,244 Tapology picks on the fight. 76% of those are favoring Petrosyan. 72% of those are picking him to win by decision. Of the 24% that have Vieira, 73% are picking him to win by submission. This is a super close fight. As you can tell by the odds, you're not getting plus money on either fighter. I'm a little surprised to see so many people picking Petrosyan. I'm actually favoring Vieira in this fight. I think, like I mentioned, we did see Vieira learn some lessons from those losses to Anthony Hernandez and Chris Curtis. I think he knows how to pace himself a little bit better, and he is crafty about getting the fight to the floor. Obviously, like I mentioned, the longer the fight goes on, it will favor Petrosyan. I could even see Petrosyan just kind of keeping the distance, picking his shots from the outside, kind of beating Vieira up on the feet, and kind of making Vieira embarrass himself a bit. Um, kind of flopping on the floor, and this being just a not very good fight. But Petrosian's takedown defense, not good. In the UFC, it's 36%. So I do see Vieira being able to get this fight to the floor at some point because he will consistently look to do so. He does have a couple of third round finishes on his resume, so he's a fighter that's always looking for the finish and always looking to get this fight to the floor. So I don't see Petrosian being able to keep this fight standing for the full 15 minutes. I do think Vieira gets him down at some point, and once he gets him down, I think it's only a matter of time before he locks up that submission. And I'm actually going to say that he gets it done early. I think Petrosian will make a mistake. Vieira is going to be fresh. He'll be able to drag him to the floor and lock something up. So official pick, Rodolfo Vieira by first round submission. Up next on the main card, we head to the lightweight division for a pretty shit fight. This is Michael the Menace Johnson versus Darius Beast Mode Flowers. Johnson is basically a washed journeyman at this point, and Flowers I see as a pretty low-end bum who doesn't necessarily belong on the UFC roster. On the red corner, we have Johnson, who is 37 years old. He is 21-19 overall. I'll say that again, 21-19 overall. Awful record. With 9 TKOs, 2 submissions, and 10 decision victories. He's got a great team behind him at Killcliff FC. He has shown flashes of greatness. He's really shown a ton of potential at times. He was on The Ultimate Fighter. He was one of the top picks and went on to the finals of that season. Really just has looked really good at times. He has everything that you would want from a top-end fighter, but then at other times he looks awful and is just super inconsistent. But this is a guy, I mean, he has wins over Tony Ferguson, Danny Castillo, Joe Lozon, Gleason Tybau, Melvin Gillard, Edson Barbosa, Dustin Poirier, Andre Fili, Alan Patrick, and Mark DeCasey. All of his losses are to pretty high-end fighters too, so they're almost somewhat excusable. He's one of the best journeymen that you'll see in the UFC. On the other side, we have Flowers, who's 29 years old. He is 12-6-1 overall. Also not a good record, with 8 KO TKO wins, 1 submission, and 3 decisions. He had a fluke win on the Contender Series that got him his UFC contract. I think he was really set up in that fight to lose against Amaran Gogoladze. And he got in a weird position where he ended up slamming his opponent, and the guy's shoulder popped out, so the fight ended. I mean, the other guy still, he was conscious. He looked fine. He just was like, oh, I'm injured. Fight's over. So I think if they rematch, Flowers probably loses that fight. Since then, Flowers has only had 1 fight in the UFC. Made his UFC debut against Jake Matthews. For a fight that I was at live, actually, and wasn't impressed with Flowers. From what I saw, his best moment of that fight was really a moment where he faked being hurt and then tried to throw some big shots at Jake Matthews. Didn't work, and then he ended up getting crushed and submitted in the second round. Most of his losses have come by submission. And then afterwards, he made some excuses about being a lightweight, not a welterweight, and now has moved down to lightweight for this fight. Michael Johnson is the minus 125 slight favorite, with Flowers sitting as a plus 105 near even underdog. There's currently 1,217 Tapology votes on this fight, with 69% of those favoring Johnson. 66% of those picking him are expecting him to win by decision. Of the 31% taking Flowers, 64% of those are picking him to win by knockout. Johnson's only ever been knocked out 3 times in his career. Once was by Justin Gaethje, who's the BMF title holder, a guy that's known for knockouts, heavy hands, really a knockout artist. Another one was by Josh Emmett, who we just saw flatline Bryce Mitchell. Guy has some crazy power. And then the other one was in his last fight by Diego Ferreira. The Ferreira loss is a bit concerning going into this fight. Ferreira is not really a striker, so that knockout loss didn't look good for Johnson. But Ferreira does have some sneaky power. He's also got a great team behind him. I think he was coming off a decent layoff going into that fight too. So I think he just sort of kind of surprised Michael Johnson in that fight. I don't think he was expecting him to strike as much. I think he just got caught. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of give him a break on that loss. So I am favoring him in this fight. Flowers is also a fighter that's going to strike with him, but he, like I've mentioned, I think he's kind of a bum. I don't think he is UFC caliber. I think he's a low-end striker, not nearly as good technique-wise as Johnson, and expecting a striking battle, I think Johnson is going to be more prepared and should be able to kind of dominate this fight. I think he'll win the striking battle. I think he can out-wrestle him too if he chooses to do so, and I think he's going to come out ahead in this fight. If he doesn't, he should probably consider retiring. His record at that point will be 21-20. Don't really want to see it go to 21-21. So, yeah, I am going with the official pick to be Michael Johnson by unanimous decision. Next up on the main card, we go to the middleweight division for a matchup between Brad Tavares and Gregory RoboCop Rodriguez. This is actually a pretty good fight, in my opinion. Both of these guys need a win in this fight, so I think we are going to see them kind of leave it all out there. It's an important fight for both of them for different reasons. On Tavares' side, he is 36 years old. He's 20-8 overall with 5 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 13 decisions. He has a great team behind him in Extreme Couture. He's got really good low kicks and good clinch work. He's just a really well-rounded fighter. He's been a great gatekeeper for this division. He's finally fallen out of the top 15, but he's lingering around in there like top 20, so still a gatekeeper at the top of the division here, and he's a pretty tough out for just about anybody in the division. On the other side, we have Rodriguez, who is 31 years old. He's 14-5 overall with 8 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 2 decisions. This guy has big power in his strikes, but he's actually a great wrestler and grappler as well. It's a really underutilized part of his game. He did use it in his last outing, and he plans on using it more going forward because it's something where he can really dominate fights and take over with. So if he starts doing that more, we could see him go pretty far in this division. He is currently sitting at a minus 240 moderate favorite, while Tavares is a plus 200 moderate underdog. There are currently 1,288 Tapology votes on this fight. 83% of those are picking Rodriguez, with 72% of those picking him, expecting him to win by knockout. Of the 17% taking Tavares, 72% of those are taking him to win a decision. I do think the decision is really Tavares' only hope of winning this fight. The last time he won by knockout was in 2018, and that was over Krzysztof Jotko. Before that, you have to go all the way back to 2011, where he knocked out Phil Baroni. So I think he holds the record for most decision wins at middleweight. He's not a finisher at all. I think Rodriguez, if there's a finish, it's more likely going to favor Rodriguez. Tavares does have a path to victory here. Like I mentioned, he does have those good low kicks. If he can keep Rodriguez on the outside and kind of pick his shots and really slow the pace of this fight down, then I think that's going to favor Tavares a lot. Tavares is the much better defensive fighter, whereas Rodriguez is the more offensive fighter. I think Tavares as getting a decision might be even a decent underdog play if you feel confident about that one. It's not the way I'm leaning. I'm actually going to pick Rodriguez in this one. He's big, he's powerful, and I think he has all the tools to win this fight. We do need to see him move forward. He's going to have to deal with those low kicks somehow, and he's going to have to close the gap and start landing shots on Tavares to get this win. He cannot get trapped on the outside taking those low kicks, or he will lose this fight. But like I mentioned, he is the better offensive fighter. He does throw more volume. He is more accurate with his shots. He also hits harder. He's the better wrestler and the better grappler. If he gets this fight to the ground, I do think he can dominate. I think he can get a submission or even a ground and pound finish. I do see him getting the finish by knockout or TKO. So my official pick will be Gregory Rodriguez by knockout in the second round. Staying in the middleweight division for this next fight, we have the debuting Robert Bryczek taking on Ihor Duelist Poteria. This is another late notice fight. Poteria is replacing Albert Duraev, and he's actually moving down a division as well. So I think that's an interesting move for him. We're going to have to see how it goes. Bryczek is 33 years old. He is 17-5 overall with 11 knockout victories, 1 submission, and 5 decisions. He is making his UFC debut here. He's on a 5-fight win streak currently. All of those 5 wins have been knockouts in the first round, and all but 2 of his knockout victories have been in the first round as well. So he's an exciting fighter to watch. Should be a fun addition to the roster. I'm not sure how much upside he has, but this at least should be a good fight here. Poteria is 27 years old. He is 19-5 overall with 9 knockouts, 6 submissions, and 4 decisions. He had a good win on the Contender Series to earn his UFC contract, but he is 1-3 since then in the UFC. His only win came over former champion Mauricio Shogun Rua, and it was his last fight of his career. Clearly a shell of his former self, but he's got a kind of a strange record. If he loses this and gets cut, I can't think of any other fighter that has their only win in the UFC has been over a champion, and then they just lost to a bunch of low-end guys besides that and got cut. Bryczek is currently sitting as a minus 198 slight favorite, and Poteria is a plus 164 slight underdog. There's currently 948 Tapology votes on this fight. 84% of those are favoring Bryczek. 88% of those are expecting him to win by knockout. Of the 16% picking Poteria, they are 63% of those are expecting him to win by knockout. So someone's likely going to sleep in this fight. I think it's one of the most exciting fights on the card, honestly, even though it's potentially between 2 pretty low-end guys. Poteria already really has 1 foot out the door, being 1-3 in the UFC. And Bryczek is already 33 years old, and he's making his UFC debut. So there's not really a ton of upside there for him. 4 out of 5 of Poteria's losses have been by knockout, though. I think it's split evenly, 2 first-round knockouts, 2 second-round knockouts. And he's moving down a division here, so the extra weight cut might honestly even make his chin worse. And going against a guy like Bryczek, he's a fast starter. Like I mentioned, most of his knockouts are in the first round, so he's going to test that chin early. UFC jitters are potential. Bryczek's making his debut here, but it's not enough to make me go away from him here. He's faced pretty decent competition over his career so far. He's fought in big enough shows that makes me think he'll be able to handle this. He'll still be able to get his game going. He's going to come out. He's not going to hold back and have those jitters. He's going to let go and let his shots fly early. So the official pick will be Robert Bryczek by first round knockout. In the co-main event of the evening, we head to the featherweight division for a matchup between top-ranked Dan 50K Ige taking on Andre Touchy Fili. This is going to be a fun matchup, but it's not one that makes a ton of sense in my opinion. Ige is coming off a loss, but I think there's other fighters closer to the top 15 than Fili that should be getting this chance to break into that top-ranked spot. Ige is 32 years old. He is 17-7 overall. He's got 5 knockout wins, 5 submission wins, and 7 decision victories. He is really dangerous no matter where the fight goes. He's got big power in his hands, and even though he's not the slickest striker, He's also a good wrestler. He's got dangerous submissions too. He's a dangerous fighter no matter where it goes. He's got a great team behind him at Extreme Couture. He's in the top 15 for a reason. This guy has wins over Mirsad Bektic, Edson Barbosa, Gavin Tucker, Damon Jackson, Nate Landwehr. He's only lost to a fighter who's not currently on the UFC roster and a high-end guy. Was in his third pro fight all the way back in, I believe it was like his third pro fight back in 2015. Every other fighter he's lost to is currently on the UFC roster and a high-end guy in Julio Arce, Calvin Cater, Chan Sung Jung, Josh Emmett, Mobsar Evloev, and Bryce Mitchell. Take that back. Chan Sung Jung did retire, but my point being, all of those guys, UFC caliber guys at the top of the weight class. On the other side, we have Feely, who's 33 years old. He is 23-10 overall. He has 10 knockout wins, 3 submissions, and 10 decisions. He is a slick striker, good technique, good boxing, solid footwork. He's also got a great team behind him at Team Alpha Male, which definitely helps with his wrestling and grappling as well. His best wins have come over Hakron Diaz, Dennis Bermudez, Miles Jury, Shaman Moraes, Charles Jourdain, Bill Algeo, and Lucas Almeida. But he does have a questionable chin, and this is going to be a big test for him to try and get back. I think he was ranked in the top 15 at one point. He's dropped out, and he's been struggling to get back there ever since. Ige is currently the minus 175 slight favorite, with Feely sitting at a plus 145 slight underdog. There's currently 1,211 Tapology votes on this fight, with 81% favoring Ige. Of those 81%, 74% are taking him to win a decision. Of the 19% taking Feely, 65% of those are taking him to win a decision. So it seems like the fans on Tapology are expecting this one to go to the judges' scorecards. I'm not so sure about that myself. I did doubt Feely last time. I thought Lucas Almeida would be able to land some shots and kind of test that chin of his, but Feely was able to get him out of there before he could ever do so. Proved me wrong in a big way there, but I'm actually still doubting him here. I have Feely ranked at number 33 in the featherweight division. Ige is sitting at 13. I definitely would have liked to see Feely jump up the division and get a shot to get back towards that top 15, but I think this is a little bit too far. Feely does have the height and reach advantage in this fight. If he can keep it on the outside, I think that's going to be his best path to victory here. Set up his shots, stay out of range of Ige, stay away from the power of Ige, and use his more dynamic technical striking to kind of pick him apart on the outside. I think he's going to have some trouble with that, though. Ige is extremely durable. This guy's never been finished. And he fought Josh Emmett, Chan Sung Jung, all those guys, the top end guys that have beaten him, and even the guys that he's beaten are dangerous fighters, and he's never been stopped. So I think that Ige should be able to walk through the fire a bit, kind of take the shots from Feely to get inside and land a shot himself that I think is going to drop Feely. I see him dropping him and following him up on the ground. Getting a TKO stoppage before the final bell here. So I am going to go with my official pick as Dan Ige by knockout in the second round. It's time for the main event of the night between Jack the Joker Hermansson and Joe Bodybagz Pyfer. This is an extremely important fight for both guys, but for very different reasons. Hermansson is 35 years old. He's 23-8 overall with 11 knockouts, 6 submissions, and 6 decisions. He is coming off a knockout loss to Roman Dolidze, and he's now fighting a fighter that's just outside the top 15, so he's trying to hold on to his spot in the top rank of the division. If he loses it at 35 years old, it's most likely he's not going to get it back, and retirement talks could start to creep on the table. So that's why it's an important fight for Hermansson to get back in the win column and hold on to his place in that top 15. he is a fighter who really needs to control distance in his fights to have success. He either needs to stay all the way on the outside at kicking range and frustrate his opponents, like he did with Chris Curtis in his last win. Chris Curtis really expected him to close the gap and try to grapple, and he just stayed on the outside and picked his shots and really frustrated Chris Curtis because Chris Curtis didn't have the footwork necessary to cut Hermansson off and find the shots of his own. So he can have success that way. He can have success on the feet, but he is a guy who likes to get the fight to the floor too. That's the other way he has success, is to close the gap entirely, get the fight to the floor. He's got extremely dangerous ground and pound and some tricky submissions as well. So all the way out or all the way in is where Hermansson needs to be to have success here. On the other side, Pyfer is 27 years old. He is 12-2 overall with 8 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 1 decision. He is a finisher. He's only been to decision once in his career. He did get the win in that fight, but it was in his 3rd pro fight, all the way back in 2018. Besides that, he's been either finishing fights or getting finished himself. He has been stopped in both of his losses. Once by knockout, once by submission. He hits extremely hard. He actually broke Francis Ngannou's punching power record, which is crazy because he's a middleweight. He has shown that he could submit fighters as well. So he's got that ground game in his pocket as well if need be, but he is a fighter who is looking to throw hands and find that knockout. Pyfer is sitting at a minus 225 moderate favorite for this fight, while Hermansson is a plus 185 slight underdog. This is really an interesting pairing here between these two styles. Because we could even see. I wouldn't be shocked if Hermansson pulled off the win. He, like I said, he can have success on the feet in this fight if he stays on the outside, and frustrates Pyfer. He does have a reach advantage. He is quick. He has some good footwork. I'm not sure we've ever seen Pyfer have to deal with something like that. So, will be interesting to see how he does deal with it and how Hermansson implements that into his game if he's going to do so. If Hermansson gets into top control, Pyfer could be in a ton of trouble too. Hermansson has extremely dangerous ground and pound. And he's got submissions too, so he can't just get careless and try and get back to the feet, or Hermansson will catch him in something. The longer the fight goes, the more we have to assume it's going to favor Hermansson as well. Like I mentioned, Pyfer's only seen a 3rd round once in his career, and it was in his 2nd pro fight all the way back in 2018. Besides that, he's finished fights either in the 1st round or 2nd round, or been finished within the first 2 rounds. Whereas Hermansson has gone the full 5 rounds twice just within his last 5 fights. So he's starting to get used to that, and the cardio and the pacing of those type of fights is something that's going to favor Hermansson the longer it goes. You could even see Pyfer's power start to wane if he starts to get tired and go later into the fight. Hermansson has a really awkward style. Like I mentioned, he frustrates people from the outside, or he'll tie you up and get you to the floor. So we're going to have to see how Pyfer deals with it, but that awkward style sometimes has made Hermansson kind of look like a fool. He has that awkward movement, and sometimes he gets caught and he just gets crushed, and he looks kind of stupid for trying that. Other times it works for him. We're gonna have to see how it goes here. Hermansson does have decent defense, but it's hard to imagine him avoiding the power shots of Pyfer long enough for him to start having success. Hermansson does, kind of have his back to the wall. He knows he needs this win, so I do kind of expect him to be cautious and kind of implement that style he used against Chris Curtis. But I think Pyfer is going to pressure more than Chris Curtis did. I think we'll see Pyfer kind of cut him off a little more. And when Hermansson goes to close the gap and get all the way inside, I think we'll see Pyfer's power come into play. And one of those big shots is going to land, and Hermansson will go to sleep. So official pick for the main event will be Joe Pyfer by knockout in the first round. And that's a wrap for this episode of the MMA Oracles podcast. I have been your host, Jack Moon. As always, I truly appreciate every single one of you listening. Let's go over some of my locks for this card. I have Daniel Marcos. He is undefeated, and I don't see Arichi Kilang being the guy to take that O from him. Devin Clark is one of my locks as well. I just don't see Prachnio. He never really gets out of first gear. I think Devin Clark's going to be able to outwork him. And then I have Loma Lukbudmi. I think she's fighting down in the division again. I don't see Bruna Brazil being able to offer her much. So those are my locks for the pick. Throw them all into a parlay. You're looking at plus 182 odds. None of my parlays have hit so far this year. We've gotten super close on a couple. And this one really isn't a very sexy pick either. It's only plus 182, and none of these fights are very good, and none of them are going to be super exciting. So that's why I think it will cash. I think the more boring it is, the more likely it is to cash. Underdogs on this card: Bogdan Guskov. I like him to knock out Zach Pauga. And Max Griffin. I like him to pull off the decision against Jeremiah Wells. I think both of them are solid underdog picks. Might put a little sprinkle on them as well. Good fights to watch on this card. There's actually, for this card not being that good, there is some fights I am interested in. Hyder Emil versus Fernie Garcia, second fight of the night. Hyder Emil, I really enjoyed watching him on the Contender Series. I think he's really gonna beat up Fernie Garcia here, so should be a good one. That Pauga versus Guskov fight should be a good knockout for Guskov. Could be boring, but that's what makes it interesting, right? Should be on the edge of your seat until we know which way that one's going, and it should happen pretty quick. Either Pauga will start to take over the fight, or Guskov's going to put him out quick. Wells versus Griffin, that was the hardest fight on this card for me to predict, so I'm really interested to see how that one plays out. I do have Griffin as the underdog, but I think that's going to be a super close fight. Giles versus Prates, that one, like I said in my prediction, Giles is super underrated. It's a big test for Prates. Prates is a guy who's always super fun to watch, so interesting matchup there. Tavares versus Rodriguez is a pretty good fight as well. Brychek versus Poteria, I expect a solid knockout win for Brychek there, so that should be a fun one. And then the co-main event, Ige versus Feely. I like that fight as well. I think Ige is going to dominate, but both guys are usually pretty entertaining to watch. So little side note as well, Balaji Oki, he's one of my breakout predictions at lightweight. So I think he's going to smoke Damir Hadzovic. Expect him to get that early knockout as well. Picking a decent amount of knockouts on this card, which should hopefully make it pretty entertaining. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. I am signing out for this episode. Thank you.